The letter arrived on the day Brigit O'Sullivan's father took his last rattling breath, his body finally surrendering to the consumption that had stalked him across the Atlantic. The elegant script bore a name that made her mother's hands tremble with desperate hope: Duncan Newcomb, the man who had promised them sanctuary, the man whose sister waited in that gleaming New York mansion with skepticism sharp enough to cut glass. But what Brigit didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Duncan Newcomb himself would look at her with eyes that saw not a servant but a soul worth cherishing. And that discovery would challenge everything she believed about her own worthiness to receive love, both human and divine. Welcome, precious souls, to the Blessed Christian Storyteller, where we explore the depths of faith, the transforming power of God's amazing grace, and the unexpected ways He writes love stories in the margins of our pain. Before we journey into Brigit O'Sullivan's encounter with love that defied all social boundaries, take a moment to subscribe and ring that bell. Share the story with someone who needs to remember that God's gifts, including love, are not earned through worthiness but received through grace. Now let us enter a tale of hope, healing, and the radical truth that we are loved not because we deserve it, but because love Himself chose us. The ship's hold smelled of death and desperation. Brigit O'Sullivan pressed a damp cloth to her father's burning forehead, listening to the rattle in his chest grow fainter with each labored breath. Her mother, Catherine, sat beside them, her lips moving in fervent prayers that rose like incense through the fetid air. They had been at sea for 39 days, fleeing an Ireland that offered only starvation and graves. The letter, her father wheezed, his grip tightening on Brigit's hand. Duncan Newcomb, good man, promised. Hush, duh, Brigit whispered, though her own heart thundered with fear. Save your strength. But Patrick O'Sullivan had no strength left to save. He died as dawn broke on the 40th day, his last words a broken whisper of thanksgiving. God is faithful. Brigit held those words close as the crew wrapped her father's body in canvas and committed it to the depths. She held them close as her mother retreated into grief-stricken silence. And she held them close when the ship finally docked in New York Harbor, and she pulled Duncan's letter from her bag, rereading the promise of employment and shelter that now seemed both precious and terrifying. The letter had arrived in Cork 8 months earlier, hand-delivered by a merchant who knew her father. Duncan Newcomb, the American businessman her father had once helped during a trip to Dublin before the famine when Ireland still breathed hope. Duncan, who had written, "Patrick, you saved my life when those thieves attacked me. I've never forgotten your kindness or your witness of Christ's love. If the famine continues and you need refuge, you have a home in America. My sister Emily and I would count it an honor to employ your family." It had seemed like an answer to desperate prayers. Now, standing on the crowded dock with her grief-shattered mother and a single trunk of belongings, Brigit wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. What kind of work awaited them? Would they truly be welcome or merely tolerated? Miss O'Sullivan. Brigit turned to find a dignified woman in expensive but understated mourning dress, her face composed but not unkind. A well-dressed gentleman stood beside her, tall, with warm brown eyes and an expression of genuine concern. "I am Mrs. Emily Newcomb," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp edge of New England breeding but softened with something that might have been sympathy. "And this is my brother, Duncan. We're so sorry for your loss." Duncan stepped forward and Brigit saw real grief in his eyes. "Your father was a true Christian gentleman," he said quietly. "I received word of his passing from the ship's captain. Please accept our deepest condolences." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that pierced through Brigit's exhausted defenses. She felt tears spring to her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Thank you, sir. He spoke of you often with great respect." Emily's expression remained reserved but not cold. She studied Catherine O'Sullivan's grief-ravaged face with what looked like genuine concern. "You've had a terrible journey. Let's get you home so you can rest. We'll discuss the particulars of your employment after you've had time to recover." The carriage ride through New York streets should have been wondrous, Brigit's first glimpse of America, but she was too numb with grief and exhaustion to take it in. She was aware of Duncan watching her mother with worry, of Emily's periodic glances at them both, assessing but not, Brigit thought, unkindly. The Newcomb mansion rose from manicured grounds like something from a dream. White columns, pristine windows, an elegance that made Brigit acutely aware of her stained traveling dress and worn shoes. But Emily led them not to the servants' quarters but to a comfortable guest room on the second floor. "You'll stay here until you're ready to begin work," Emily said, her tone brooking no argument. My brother insisted you be treated as guests first, and I agree, you've suffered enough. Ma'am, Brigit ventured, confused, we're here for employment. And you'll have it, Emily interrupted, but not unkindly. But not today, not this week. You've just lost your father and crossed an ocean. Take time to grieve properly. God's mercies are new every morning, but they require us to rest long enough to receive them. After Emily left, Duncan lingered in the doorway. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. And Miss O'Sullivan, your father's kindness to me wasn't just physical rescue. He spoke to me about Christ's love when I was in a dark place spiritually. His witness changed my life. I consider it a privilege to honor his memory by caring for his family. He left before Brigit could respond, but his words settled over her like a warm blanket. That first week passed in a blur of grief and gradual healing. Emily's household staff were professional but kind, bringing meals, changing linens, respecting their need for privacy. Catherine slowly emerged from her shock, her faith providing an anchor in the storm of loss. And Duncan visited daily, never intrusively, but checking on their welfare with genuine concern. He brought books for Brigit to read, knowing somehow that she loved stories. He sat with Catherine and listened to her reminisce about Patrick, offering the ministry of presence without empty platitudes. Brigit found herself watching for his visits, found comfort in his quiet strength and obvious faith. When 2 weeks had passed, Emily summoned Brigit to her private sitting room. You look much recovered, Emily observed, gesturing for Brigit to sit. Are you ready to discuss your position in this household? Yes, ma'am. Emily studied her for a long moment. I'll be frank with you, Miss O'Sullivan. When Duncan first proposed bringing your family here, I had reservations, not because you're Irish, she held up a hand to forestall protest, but because I've seen my brother's generous heart exploited before. He trusts too easily, sees the best in everyone. It's admirable but dangerous. Brigit's spine stiffened. We're not here to exploit anyone, ma'am. My father was a man of integrity and I was raised the same. I'm beginning to see that, Emily said, and something like approval flickered in her eyes. Which is why I'm offering you a position as my personal secretary rather than a scullery maid. You read and write well. Duncan mentioned the letters your father sent him. I need someone intelligent and discreet to help manage my correspondence and household accounts. Your mother, when she's ready, can oversee the linen room, light work, not the heavy labor of the laundry. Brigit stared stunned. Ma'am, that's far more than we expected. It's what's needed, Emily said crisply. And it's what my brother wanted for you, though he was too much of a gentleman to say so directly. He has an irritating habit of trying to protect everyone's dignity while arranging their lives for them. Despite everything, Brigit felt a smile tug at her lips. He seems like a good man. He is, Emily's expression softened fractionally, which is precisely why I'm protective of him. His faith in people's goodness is beautiful, but it's left him vulnerable to manipulation. I trust you understand what I'm saying. The warning was clear, hurt Duncan and you'll answer to me, but beneath it Brigit heard something else, a sister's fierce love for her brother. I understand, ma'am, and I give you my word, my family will never betray the trust you've both shown us. Emily nodded, satisfied. Then we have an understanding. You'll start tomorrow. I'll show you your office. The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Brigit worked alongside Emily, who proved to be demanding but fair, with exacting standards and a dry wit that occasionally surprised a laugh from Brigit. Catherine gradually regained her strength, finding purpose in managing the household linens and, to everyone's surprise, befriending the cook with her knowledge of Irish recipes. And Duncan was everywhere and nowhere. He worked in the city, managing the family's textile business, but he dined with them most evenings. He discussed theology with Catherine, debated literature with Emily, and sought Brigit's opinion on everything from scripture to social reform. You have a keen mind, he told her one evening after a spirited discussion about grace versus works. My father used to say that intelligence unused is a gift rejected. I'm glad you don't reject your gifts, Miss O'Sullivan. Brigit, she said impulsively, please call me Brigit. Miss O'Sullivan makes me feel like we're strangers. His smile was like sunrise, only if you'll call me Duncan. Emily watched these interactions with an expression Brigit couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something that might have been resignation. 3 months into their residence, Brigit realized she was in trouble. She'd fallen in love with Duncan Newcomb. It was impossible, inappropriate, and absolutely undeniable. She loved the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his faith. She loved his genuine care for the workers in his factories, his determination to treat them fairly even when other businessmen called him foolish. She loved his laughter, his kindness, the way he listened as if her words truly mattered. But she was a maid, secretary or not, she was still an employee. He was her employer, a wealthy businessman from one of New York's most respected families. The gap between them was unbridgeable. Brigit began to withdraw, recognizing the danger of her feelings. She kept their conversations professional, avoided being alone with him, threw herself into work with almost desperate intensity. Emily noticed immediately. "Have you and my brother quarreled?" she asked one afternoon, looking up from her correspondence. "No, ma'am." "Then why are you avoiding him? He's asked me twice if he's offended you somehow." Brigit's hands stilled on the ledger she'd been reviewing. "I'm not avoiding him, I'm simply maintaining appropriate boundaries." "Ah," Emily set down her pen, studying Brigit with those sharp, assessing eyes. "And what precisely do you consider appropriate boundaries?" "Ma'am, I'm your employee, your brother is my employer, certain familiarities wouldn't be proper." "I see." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Brigit, may I speak to you not as your employer but as a woman who's watched her brother fall in love for the first time in his life?" Brigit's head snapped up, shock making her voice sharp. "Ma'am, I've done nothing." "Of course you haven't," Emily interrupted. "You've been perfectly proper, which is driving Duncan to distraction because he can't figure out how to court someone who won't let him get close enough to express his intentions." The room spun. "Court, ma'am, that's not, he couldn't possibly." "Why not?" Emily's tone was genuinely curious. "Because you're Irish, because you're employed in this household, because you believe you're somehow unworthy." All of the above, Brigit wanted to say, but the words stuck in her throat. Emily sighed. "I had my doubts about you at first, I'll admit that freely, but I've watched you these past months. I've seen your integrity, your faith, your intelligence. I've seen the way you care for your mother, the way you work without complaint, the way you speak truth even when it might cost you. And most importantly, I've seen the way my brother looks at you, like you're the answer to prayers he didn't know how to pray. But the difference in our stations is irrelevant to Duncan and should be irrelevant to you," Emily said firmly. "We're all equal at the foot of the cross, are we not? Or do you believe God's grace depends on social class?" The rebuke struck home. Brigit had spent so much time feeling unworthy, focusing on her poverty and position, that she'd forgotten the fundamental truth of the gospel. Worth wasn't earned, it was bestowed by God himself. Brigit struggled to find words. "I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to be anything other than a servant." "Then perhaps it's time to learn that you're a daughter of the king first," Emily said gently. "Everything else is secondary to that identity." That evening, Duncan asked Brigit to walk with him in the garden. Her heart hammered as she joined him, uncertain what to expect. He was quiet at first, seemingly absorbed in the rose bushes Emily tended with such care. "Brigit," he finally said, "have I done something to upset you?" No, of course not." "Then why won't you talk to me anymore?" He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "We used to have such wonderful conversations. Now you barely look at me. If I've made you uncomfortable in any way, please tell me so I can correct it." "You haven't done anything wrong," Brigit said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The fault is mine." "How could the fault possibly be yours?" "Because I fell in love with you," she wanted to say, "because every conversation made it worse, because I'm terrified of hopping for something I can never have." "Because I forgot my place," she said instead. Duncan's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like anger. "Your place?" "Brigit, what is your place?" "I'm your employee, your sister's secretary, I'm—" "You're a child of God," Duncan interrupted, his voice intense. "Created in his image, redeemed by Christ's blood, precious beyond measure. That's your place, that's your identity. Everything else is just details." "Details that matter," Brigit protested. "You're a Newcomb, I'm an Irish immigrant whose father died in a ship's hold." "Your father was one of the finest men I ever met," Duncan said fiercely. "His faith was real, his integrity unquestionable, his love for Christ evident in every word and action. If anything, I should feel unworthy to court his daughter." The word court hung between them like a bell struck. "Duncan," Brigit's voice trembled, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." He took a step closer, and Brigit could see her own longing reflected in his eyes. Brigit, I've been trying to find the courage to tell you this for weeks. I love you, not despite who you are, but because of who you are, your faith, your strength, your compassion, your brilliant mind, your fierce loyalty to your mother. Everything about you draws me like a compass finding true north. Tears blurred Brigit's vision. I'm nobody, I have nothing to offer you. You're offering me yourself, Duncan said softly. That's everything, don't you see? God doesn't ask us to be worthy before He loves us. He loves us in our unworthiness and makes us worthy through Christ. How can I do less? How can I look at the woman God has brought into my life and say she's not good enough because of circumstances beyond her control? Your friends' society, they'll never accept. Then they're not truly my friends, Duncan said. Brigit, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking if you could love me as I am, a man whose greatest treasure is his faith, who wants to build a life serving God and serving others, who needs a partner who shares that vision. He paused, vulnerability making his voice rough. Could you love that man, do you think? The truth burst from Brigit's heart before her fears could silence it. I already do. Duncan's smile was radiant. He reached for her hand, and when Brigit didn't pull away, he pressed it to his heart. Then will you let me court you properly? Will you give us a chance to see what God might build from this unlikely beginning? Brigit looked at this good man, this man of faith and integrity who saw value in her that she'd struggled to see in herself. And she thought of Emily's words, we're all equal at the foot of the cross. Yes, she whispered, yes, I will. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Brigit had imagined. Duncan courted her not with expensive gifts, though he tried, until Brigit gently insisted she needed nothing but his time, but with small, thoughtful gestures that showed he truly saw her. Books on subjects she'd mentioned wanting to learn about, theological discussions that challenged her thinking, invitations to accompany him when he visited the workers in his factories, seeking her insight into their needs and concerns. He introduced her to his friends, and the ones who raised eyebrows at her Irish accent and humble background were quietly removed from his social circle. If they can't see your value, he told her firmly, then they're not people I want in my life. Emily observed their courtship with a satisfaction that surprised Brigit. One evening, she called Brigit into her sitting room. I owe you an apology, Emily said without preamble. Ma'am, when you first arrived, I was prepared to dislike you. I thought you might be a fortune hunter or someone who would take advantage of Duncan's generous nature. Emily's smile was rueful. I was wrong. You're exactly what my brother needs, someone whose faith is real, whose character is proven, who challenges him to be better while accepting him as he is. I'm still afraid, Brigit admitted. Afraid I'll wake up and discover this was all a dream, afraid I'm not enough. Stop, Emily interrupted gently. That's the enemy talking, trying to steal your joy by whispering lies about your worth. You are enough because Christ makes you enough. Duncan sees that clearly. When will you? Catherine echoed similar sentiments. Your father would have loved this, she told Brigit, tears of joy in her eyes. He always said God's grace was bigger than our circumstances. Look how he's proven that true. 6 months into their courtship, Duncan proposed. Not with grand gestures or public spectacle, but in the garden where they'd first spoken honestly about their feelings. He knelt in the grass, heedless of the dirt on his expensive trousers, and took Brigit's hands in his. Brigit O'Sullivan, he said, you have shown me what it means to walk by faith rather than sight. You've challenged me, encouraged me, made me want to be the man God calls me to be. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Brigit thought of her journey, the loss, the grief, the fear. She thought of her father's dying words about God's faithfulness. She thought of every moment she'd felt unworthy, every time she doubted that good things could happen to someone like her. And then she thought of grace, unearned, undeserved, freely given. Yes, she said through joyful tears, yes, Duncan, I will marry you. The wedding was small but perfect. Catherine wept throughout the ceremony. Emily served as matron of honor, her usually composed face showing genuine happiness. And Duncan looked at Brigit like she was the most precious thing in creation. But it was the vows that Brigit remembered most clearly. I take you not because you've earned this love, Duncan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, but because God's grace brought us together. Just as Christ loved the church sacrificially, I promise to love you not for what you do but for who you are, my beloved, my gift from God. Brigit echoed similar vows, her voice strong. I take you as God's blessing in my life. I promise to love you not because I'm worthy of this joy, but because God's grace makes me worthy to receive it. Together, we'll build a life that points others to the one who gives good gifts to his children. The years that followed were not without challenges. Duncan's business faced difficulties when he insisted on fair wages and safe working conditions, policies his competitors scorned as financially foolish. But God blessed his integrity, and the business not only survived but thrived. Brigit struggled initially with the social expectations of being Mrs. Duncan Newcomb, but she discovered that her perspective as an immigrant, as someone who'd known poverty and loss, gave her unique insight into helping others. She and Duncan used their resources to help newly arrived immigrant families, providing employment, housing, and, most importantly, the gospel of grace. Catherine lived another 15 years, long enough to hold her 3 grandchildren and tell them stories about their grandfather's faith and God's faithfulness. Emily never married, but she became a beloved aunt to Duncan and Brigit's children, and a fierce advocate for immigrants' rights and women's education. And Duncan and Brigit built a marriage founded on mutual respect, shared faith, and the constant reminder that love, both human and divine, was a gift of grace, not a reward for worthiness. 20 years into their marriage, Brigit stood in the same garden where Duncan had proposed, watching their children play. Duncan came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the day I arrived in New York," Brigit said. "Grieving my father, terrified of the future, certain I was nobody worth noticing. And now I know that I was always worth noticing, not because of anything I did, but because God made me worthy through Christ. You helped me see that truth, Duncan. You loved me when I couldn't love myself." Duncan turned her to face him, his eyes soft with affection. "And you taught me that grace isn't just theology, it's the way we're meant to live, extending to others the same unearned, undeserved love that God extends to us." Brigit leaned into his embrace, thanking God for the journey that had brought her here, for the loss that led to gain, for the fear that taught her faith, for the unworthiness that revealed grace. "It is finished," she whispered, quoting Christ's final words from the cross. "It is finished," Duncan agreed. "The work of earning salvation, earning love, earning worth, Christ finished it all. We just get to rest in that finished work and share it with others." And that, Brigit thought, was the truest definition of grace, not something you earned, but something you received and then freely gave away. Dear beloved friends, if Brigit and Duncan's story has stirred your heart, if their journey from tragedy to love has reminded you that God delights in giving good gifts to his children, gifts we don't deserve but are freely offered through grace, I have 3 requests. First, subscribe to the Blessed Christian Storyteller and turn on notifications. These stories of radical grace and transforming love need to reach every person who's still trying to earn what Christ freely offers. Second, share this video with someone who feels unworthy of love, whether divine or human. Someone who's trapped in the lie that they must achieve a certain status or fix all their flaws before they can receive good things. They need to hear that worth is bestowed, not achieved. Third, comment below about your own encounter with grace-filled love. When did God show you that his gifts aren't rewards for good behavior but expressions of his lavish love? When did you stop trying to earn what he freely gives? Your testimony has power, and this community needs to hear it. Remember Brigit's transformation from seeing herself as nobody to understanding she was a daughter of the King. That's what grace does. It doesn't wait for us to become worthy. It declares us worthy through Christ and then transforms us from the inside out. If you're carrying the weight of unworthiness today, lay it down at the foot of the cross. You are loved not because you're good enough, but because God is love. You are valued not because of your achievements, but because Christ's sacrifice made you precious beyond measure. Until next time, may you rest in your identity as God's beloved child. May you walk in the freedom of knowing you don't have to earn his favor, and may you extend that same grace-filled love to everyone you meet. This is the Blessed Christian Storyteller reminding you that it is finished, completely, perfectly, eternally finished. And because it's finished, you are free to receive every good gift God wants to give you. God bless you all. Amen.